The sound reaches you first, not the roar of the crowd. That comes later. What reaches you first is the scraping, metal against stone, chains dragging across marble steps as someone descends into sunlight they will never see the same way again. You are standing in a corridor beneath the arena floor, and through the iron gate ahead, you can see the sand glowing white under the midday sun. The heat is already unbearable down here in the shadows. Out there, under the full weight of summer, it will be suffocating. The person chained beside you is trembling, not from fear of death. Death would be mercy. They are trembling because they know what mercy looks like in Rome, and this is not it. Before we go any deeper into what happened in that arena, I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from. It amazes me every single time that a story this ancient, this brutal, can reach people across every continent, every language, every culture. Drop a comment and let me know. Rome. The year is 73 AD. The Colosseum is still decades away from completion, but the older amphitheaters are already perfecting something far more sophisticated than violence. They are perfecting theater. Not the kind with scripted heroes and tragic endings written by playwrights. The kind where real people perform their own destruction, where humiliation is choreographed with the same precision Romans used to build aqueducts, where the annihilation of a human being's dignity becomes as reliable and repeatable as any engineering feat in the empire. Her name was Lucia, 19 years old. 3 days ago, she woke in a villa where servants brought her water scented with rose petals, where her biggest concern was which stola to wear to her cousin's wedding, where her father's name, Senator Marcus Flavius, opened doors across the city, where her future seemed as solid as the marble floors she walked on every morning. 2 days ago, soldiers came, not with questions, with chains. Her father had made a calculation that powerful men make when they think they understand the game. He had backed a rival to the emperor in a succession dispute. He had bet on the wrong man. In Rome, that is not a political miscalculation. It is treason. And treason does not only punish the traitor. Yesterday, her father and 3 brothers were executed, beheaded, quickly. This is what Roman law considers mercy for citizens of senatorial class. A swift death, no prolonged suffering. Their bodies were returned to the family for proper burial. Their names, though disgraced, were recorded in history. But Lucia is a woman, and Roman law makes a distinction that reveals something about how power thinks about humiliation. Men of her class die with whatever dignity a swift execution allows. Women are made into lessons. Not through death, but through spectacle, through the systematic destruction of everything that gave them identity before 50,000 witnesses who will carry the memory of her shame into every corner of the city. She stands now in the center of the arena wearing a tunic that has been deliberately soaked in water, not to cool her in the heat, to make the fabric transparent, to cling to every curve of her body, to strip away privacy before anything else is stripped away. Around her neck hangs a wooden placard painted with words large enough for the nearest rose to read, small enough that the message will spread through the crowd, person to person, building anticipation. Traitor's daughter who thought herself above Rome. The crowd reads. The crowd understands. The roaring intensifies. 4 men enter the arena. They are not gladiators. Gladiators are warriors, and this is not combat. They are not executioners. Execution would end this too quickly. They are actors, professionals from one of Rome's theatrical companies, hired specifically for this performance. They carry props, a wooden throne painted gold, a crown made of twisted reeds, a whip designed not to kill but to mark. And the crowd, the 50,000 people packed into stone seats that radiate heat like oven walls, understand immediately what play is about to be performed. The lead actor approaches Lucia with the throne. He speaks loudly, his voice trained to project to the upper tiers. The traitor's daughter thought herself a queen. Let us show Rome what happens to false queens. The crowd erupts. This is the opening line, the beginning of a performance that has been rehearsed, that has specific acts and specific timing, that will last exactly 3 hours, because that is how long officials have determined maximizes impact without losing audience attention. Here is what they never taught you in history class about Rome. You learned about military conquests and engineering marvels. You learned about Caesar and Cicero, about law codes and architectural innovations. You watched movies where Russell Crowe fought with honor and Joaquin Phoenix played a villain. But you never learned about the bureaucracy of humiliation, about the administrative infrastructure required to implement psychological destruction at scale across an empire of 50 million people, about the legal frameworks that specified exactly which type of humiliation was appropriate for which crime and which social class, about the economic systems that made degradation profitable, about the philosophical treatises that analyzed and justified and refined the methods of breaking human beings in public. The Roman system was sophisticated in ways that make modern people uncomfortable to acknowledge. It was not random cruelty. It was not mob violence spiraling out of control. It was calculated, systematic, documented, discussed openly by the empire's greatest minds. Seneca, the Stoic philosopher who tutored Emperor Nero, wrote extensively about the educational value of public humiliation. He argued that witnessing the degradation of those who violated social order reinforced proper behavior in observers more effectively than any lecture or law. That the emotional experience of watching someone destroyed created psychological barriers against transgression that philosophy alone could never achieve. Cicero, Rome's greatest orator, wrote about the bonding function of spectacles, how shared witness to punishment created emotional ties between state and citizens, how the crowd's collective participation in judgment made them complicit in power, gave them ownership of the social order they were helping enforce. Roman legal theorists developed frameworks distinguishing between punishments for body and punishments for status. Death attacked the body. Humiliation attacked identity. And for certain classes of criminals, particularly those who threatened social hierarchy rather than committing violence against persons, destruction of identity was deemed more appropriate than destruction of body. This was theory. But theory built an infrastructure. Every major city in the empire had amphitheaters or theaters adapted for spectacles. Smaller towns had open forums where humiliation rituals could be performed for local audiences. The logistics were staggering. Officials called editors organized events with authority to requisition resources and condemned criminals. Contractors bid for supply contracts, animals, performers, props, victims. Trainers called laniste managed professionals who specialized in theatrical degradation. Record keepers tracked which criminals were allocated to which spectacles, ensuring no waste of human resources. The economics made expansion inevitable. Wealthy citizens sponsored spectacles to gain political favor. The more elaborate the humiliation, the greater the prestige. A simple execution might cost the equivalent of a laborer's annual wage. An elaborate 3-hour humiliation spectacle with professional performers, exotic props, and dramatic staging could cost 20 times that. And the sponsor's name would be announced to the crowd, their generosity praised, their status elevated. Back in the arena, Lucia is forced to sit on the golden throne. The crowd laughs. The actors begin their performance. They mock worship her, bowing elaborately, then suddenly shift to shoving her, spitting, making her repeat phrases of self-condemnation. I am a traitor's daughter. I thought myself better than Rome. I deserve this shame. Each repetition is louder than the last. Each refusal is met with a crack of the whip across her back, not hard enough to kill, precisely hard enough to mark without causing unconsciousness. The actors are skilled at calibration. They have done this before. Many times. An hour passes, then 2. The sun climbs higher. The heat becomes a physical presence, pressing down on everyone. Water is brought to the actors periodically. None is brought to Lucia. This is intentional. Dehydration affects speech, causes confusion, makes resistance harder. The crowd watches her coherence fade, watches her begin to stumble over the words she is forced to repeat, watches the precise moment when something in her eyes changes, when the person who entered the arena begins to disappear. In the upper seats, a merchant from Gaul watches with his son. Later, he will return home and tell his community what he saw. The story will spread. The message will be clear. This is what Rome does to those who challenge it. Not quickly, not mercifully, thoroughly. In the middle sections, a freedwoman watches with mixed emotions. She was once enslaved, earned her freedom through decades of service. She has clawed her way to modest prosperity. Seeing a senator's daughter reduced to this gives her a complicated satisfaction, hierarchy inverted, privilege destroyed, but also terror. Because if this can happen to senator's daughter, no one is truly safe. In the lower seats, closest to the arena, a young man watches with the intensity of someone memorizing every detail. He is a writer, an observer. 30 years from now, he will include this scene in a historical chronicle. He will describe it with clinical precision, with no moral judgment, as simply one more notable event in the unfolding of Roman power. This is how memory works in empire. The merchant carries fear. The freedwoman carries complex confirmation of her worldview. The writer carries documentation. And 50,000 witnesses carry the knowledge that Rome's reach extends not just into territories and bodies, but into identity itself. The 3 hours end not with Lucia's death, but with her release back to a cell beneath the arena. She is alive. She will remain alive for years, living in her family's former villa, which has been confiscated and converted to state use, working as a servant in rooms where she once gave orders. This is part of the design. Her continued existence, her daily degradation in private, reminds the elite class that punishment does not end when spectacle ends, that Rome's memory is long and thorough. Archaeological evidence confirms the scale. Amphitheater ruins across Europe, North Africa, the Middle East, all show similar architectural features. Spaces beneath arena floors where victims waited, channels for removing blood and waste, holding areas for animals and performers. At some sites, graffiti survives. Names of performers boasting about particularly memorable humiliations they orchestrated. Crude drawings showing spectacle scenes. Spectators scrawled reviews. The traitor's daughter spectacle in summer was memorable. Documents preserved in dry Egyptian papyrus reveal administrative minutiae. Budget records for spectacles listing costs for theatrical performers for degradation scene as distinct line items from gladiator fees or beast purchase. Correspondence between officials discussing optimal timing of humiliation spectacles, not too frequent or they lose impact, not too rare or lessons are forgotten. What survivors who recorded their experiences described matches what modern trauma experts immediately recognize: disassociation, permanent alterations in self-concept, inability to reconstruct continuous identity after public destruction. These are not generic suffering descriptions. They are specific psychological injuries that occur when humiliation is systematic and witnessed. The empire eventually fell. The Colosseum became a ruin. The administrative infrastructure collapsed. But the documentation survived, not hidden as shameful secrets, but preserved as normal records of governance. Because Rome never considered this wrong. Rome considered this necessary. A technology of control as important as legions or laws. There is a moment in Lucia's story, about halfway through the 3 hours when the heat and dehydration and repetitive degradation have blurred her awareness, when a child in the audience asks their father, "Why doesn't she just refuse?" And the father, a minor official who understands how power works, explains patiently, because refusal would make it worse, because she still hopes it will end, because she does not yet understand that the person who could refuse no longer exists. This is the sophistication, not torture that breaks the body, but theater that dissolves identity, not violence that creates martyrs, but humiliation that creates cautionary tales, not execution that ends suffering, but survival that extends it indefinitely as lesson to others. 50,000 witnesses left the arena that day. They walked back to homes across the city. They told families what they saw. The story spread through markets, taverns, bathhouses. It reached the provinces in letters and travelers' tales. A senator's daughter reduced to nothing. Not killed, unmade, and everyone who heard understood that this could happen to anyone who forgot their place in Roman order. In a villa across the city, another senator who had been considering supporting a rival faction heard the story and quietly withdrew his support. In a merchant's home, a daughter who had been complaining about restrictions on her freedom fell silent when her father described what he witnessed. In a soldier's barracks, men who had been grumbling about an unpopular commander remembered what awaited those whose resistance became visible. This is how 50 million people are controlled by a relative handful, not through constant military presence at every town, but through memories of spectacles, through stories that spread like virus through population, through architecture of fear built not from walls, but from witnessed humiliation. The Colosseum stands today as a tourist attraction. Visitors from around the world marvel at Roman engineering. They imagine gladiatorial combat, dramatic battles, theatrical entertainment. The gift shop sells miniature replicas and postcards with sunset photos. Tour guides discuss architectural innovations and historical significance. Almost none mention the midday spectacles, the humiliation rituals that happened between morning beast hunts and afternoon gladiator fights, the systematic destruction of human dignity that occurred in the same space where heroes fought and died gloriously. Because those stories are harder to romanticize, harder to turn into movie scenes or inspirational lessons, harder to reconcile with the civilization we're taught to admire as the foundation of Western culture. But the evidence remains in legal texts that specify appropriate degradations for different crimes, in letters that describe spectacles with casual familiarity, in graffiti scratched by spectators who wanted to remember what they saw, in architectural features designed specifically for humiliation logistics, in survivor accounts that describe damage that never fully healed. Lucia lived another 17 years after that day in the arena. She never married, never recovered her family property, never spoke publicly about what happened. A historian who interviewed servants in her later household recorded that she would sometimes stop mid-conversation, mid-gesture, as if forgetting what she was doing, as if the thread connecting past self to present self had been severed permanently that day under the summer sun. She was one of thousands, one city, one summer. The system operated for centuries, across provinces, daily, with precision that matched any other Roman innovation. When Rome fell, the spectacles ended, but the understanding that power maintains itself through calibrated humiliation, through public destruction of identity, through turning humans into lessons, that understanding never fully disappeared. It simply evolved, changed clothes, found new stages, because what Rome discovered was not unique to Rome. It was something fundamental about how control works when you have more people than soldiers, something about the efficiency of fear compared to force, something about how much power lies not in killing, but in unmaking. The sand in the arena floor has long since blown away, the blood absorbed into soil that now lies meters beneath modern streets. The voices of 50,000 witnesses are silent, but the placard Lucia wore around her neck, "Traitor's daughter who thought herself above Rome," that message still echoes. In every system that uses humiliation as governance, in every moment when power decides that destroying who someone is matters more than destroying what they've done, in every spectacle designed not to kill but to unmake. The chains that dragged across marble steps that morning made a sound that no one recorded, but everyone who heard it understood what it meant. Not the sound of someone being led to death, the sound of someone being led to something worse, to survival without self, to breathing and walking and existing in a world where the person they were had been systematically erased before witnesses who would carry that erasure forward into memory. Rome called this justice. History called it spectacle. The survivors, in the few fragments that recorded their voices, called it something else. They called it the moment when they learned that cruelty achieves its greatest efficiency not through passion, but through precision. Not through chaos, but through choreography. Not through ending life, but through ensuring that life continues as a perpetual reminder of what happens when you forget your place in the order of things. The sun that beat down on the arena that day set eventually. The crowd dispersed. The actors collected their pay. The officials recorded the event in ledgers. And somewhere in the cells beneath, Lucia sat in darkness and tried to remember who she had been 3 days before. Tried to find that person in the space where memory meets identity. Found only absence. Only the echo of chains scraping stone. Only the sound of 50,000 voices who had witnessed her transformation from citizen to cautionary tale. And that sound, that absence, that transformation, that was the point all along.